My daughter-in-law respected only one person in this entire family, my husband. To her, I was nothing but a thorn in her side. Every single day, she found new ways to strip me of everything I had, piece by piece, smile by fake smile. Until one day, she went too far. And that was the moment I decided the whole world would finally see her true face. Join me in today's video to prove that I am not alone. Subscribe, like, and leave a comment below to tell me where you're watching from, my dear friends. Let's make sure the truth is heard. If you see me sitting here calmly, remember that only a few weeks ago, my daughter-in-law screamed in my face that an old, useless woman like me didn't need money. My name is April Harlow. I'm 67 years old, and that sentence still echoes in my head like a bell that refuses to stop ringing. I remember the sound of her heels clicking on the marble floor, the smell of my husband's office, and the way my fingers trembled as I opened the safe. Empty. Every envelope, every stack of savings that Trevor and I had built for our retirement, gone. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there in silence, feeling something inside me break and harden at the same time. My little hidden camera in the corner of the bookshelf had done its job. On the screen, Maeve appeared, her red lipstick gleaming as she pulled out the money one stack at a time. She laughed while cursing, her voice sharp as glass. That line again, an old useless woman like you doesn't need money anyway. She didn't even whisper it. She said it proudly, like cruelty was part of her charm. Later that evening, I sat at my kitchen table and watched another clip. Maeve and her friend Ashlyn were drinking champagne at a spa, faces covered in gold masks, waving credit cards like trophies. I could almost hear the cash register in my head, counting the years of my life they were wasting. For a long moment, I sat still, the kind of stillness that feels dangerous, because you know it's the start of something. Then I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. When Trevor's voice came through, tired but familiar, I said softly that he needed to come home. He asked if something was wrong. I told him no, not wrong. Just time to see the truth with his own eyes. He didn't understand at first, but he would soon. I looked at the camera one last time before turning it off. My reflection on the dark screen looked older, yes, but sharper too. Age doesn't make you useless. It makes you quiet enough to listen and smart enough to wait. When I met Trevor Harlow, I was 32 and still learning how to breathe again after a painful divorce. I worked as a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm in Dallas, spending my days buried in spreadsheets and numbers that never betrayed me the way people did. My life then was quiet, predictable, and lonely, in the way only silence after heartbreak can be. I didn't plan to fall in love again, certainly not with a man like Trevor. Elegant, older, confident in a way that filled every room he entered. He owned a chain of small fashion boutiques across Texas, always dressed with casual precision, like someone who knew the weight of appearances but carried it lightly. We met during a tax audit. He was my client, and I remember thinking he was too charming for someone who needed help with numbers. He noticed my hesitation when I adjusted my glasses, and instead of talking about expenses, he asked if I ever took time off for myself. I laughed then, because I didn't. Somehow he remembered that laugh. A week later, he invited me to lunch and I said yes, telling myself it was just business. It wasn't. Our relationship unfolded slowly, at first two people, cautious but curious. He had been divorced for years, said he wanted companionship, not chaos. I wanted safety, not romance. But life has its quiet tricks. A year later, we were married in a small ceremony under the oak trees behind his ranch house. For a while, everything felt right. I managed the finances of his boutique chain, and we built a life that looked complete from the outside. What was missing didn't show in photos the ache of an empty nursery we never filled. For 8 years, we tried to have a child. Treatments, consultations, hope followed by silence. Each failed test became another quiet apology between us. I started avoiding baby aisles at grocery stores. Trevor began working longer hours, pretending it was for expansion, not escape. We told our friends we were fine. We weren't. Then came his trip to Mexico for a supplier meeting. When he returned, he was different, gentler, distracted, carrying something like hope. He told me about a little girl he met through a local charity, a child left alone after a car crash. Her name was Maeve. He showed me a photograph. She looked fragile and watchful, clutching a worn, stuffed bear. I saw something in Trevor's eyes that unsettled me, a tenderness I hadn't seen in years. He said we could adopt her, that maybe this was life giving us a second chance. I hesitated, but in the end I agreed. Perhaps I mistook my fear for compassion. The adoption process moved fast, too fast. When Maeve arrived, I wanted to love her, and I tried. But every time Trevor called her sweetheart, every time she smiled, only at him, a small chill crept deeper into my heart. Maeve Bennett came into our lives when she was 5, carrying a small pink suitcase and a gaze too steady for a child her age. She was beautiful in a quiet, deliberate way, with dark curls that framed her face and eyes that watched everything. From the very beginning, she clung to Trevor. If he sat, she was in his lap. If he left the room, she followed like his shadow. When I tried to help her with shoes or hair or breakfast, she would stiffen, lips pressed tight, as if my touch didn't belong. I told myself she just needed time. But days became months, and her affection never reached me. Trevor adored her, maybe too much. He bought her everything she wanted. Designer shoes for a child still learning to tie them, a pink silk dress from one of his own boutiques, a room full of toys that looked like a store display. He said it was to make up for what she'd lost. But I knew part of it came from guilt. The man who had built an empire couldn't build a family, and Maeve became his redemption story. I watched them laugh together in the garden, their hands covered in soil as they planted marigolds. I wanted to join them, but every time I stepped closer, Maeve would turn her face away, her little shoulders tensing. At parent meetings or school events, Trevor took her hand, introduced her as his daughter, and I followed a step behind the quiet observer. He even enrolled her in a private academy that cost more than our first house, saying she deserved the best. I nodded, smiled, and signed the checks. What else could I do? When the adoption papers finally arrived from Mexico, I thought that chapter was closed. But Trevor, always too trusting with bureaucracy, failed to file one last set of documents required for legal recognition in the U.S. The file listed us only as temporary guardians. I noticed it circled the line in red and told him we should fix it immediately. He waved his hand, saying it didn't matter, we were her parents in every way that counted. I wish I had insisted. That single oversight, that one missing signature, became the shadow that would later ruin us. Because years later, when Maeve grew into a young woman and crossed the line that no daughter should ever cross, the law would look at her and Shane not as siblings, but as two unrelated adults. No paper trail, no crime. Just silence and disgust left for me to live with. A year after Maeve came into our home, the impossible happened. At 39, after years of failed treatments and whispered prayers, I found myself staring at a positive pregnancy test. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor, trembling, laughing and crying all at once. Trevor dropped to his knees beside me when I told him, his hands covering his face as if he couldn't believe it. For the first time in years, our house felt alive again. filled with plans and hopes we had long buried. When Shane was born, a healthy baby boy with his father's eyes and my quiet expression, it felt like life had finally balanced its scales. But joy has a strange way of making shadows sharper. From the very first day I brought Shane home, Maeve's smile changed. She was 6 then, watching from the doorway as I rocked him in my arms. When Trevor cooed over the baby, she crossed her arms, face stiff, lips pressed thin. At first, I thought it was childish jealousy, something that would fade with time. I tried to include her, asking her to help fetch diapers to sing to her little brother, but her hands would stay still, her voice silent. Soon the tension thickened. One afternoon, I found Shane's toy car crushed under Maeve's chair. She said it was an accident, eyes flat and distant. Another time, she knocked over his milk bottle and stared at me with a strange calm, as if waiting to see how I would react. I wanted to scold her, but Trevor stopped me, saying she was only acting out because she felt left out. "She's still a child," he said gently. "Give her time." I wanted to believe him. But there was something in Maeve's eyes, something cold, deliberate, that made my skin tighten. I started noticing how she watched me not with affection or curiosity, but with quiet calculation. When I held Shane, she would turn her back. When I kissed Trevor goodnight, she would appear at the doorway, silent, staring. There were moments when her presence made the room feel colder, as if some small storm was gathering behind her calm little face. I loved her, or at least I wanted to. But as Shane grew, that love began to tangle with fear. I knew what jealousy looked like. I had seen it in adults at work, in old friendships gone sour. But to see it in a child, my child was something else entirely. And though Trevor brushed it off, I could feel it deep in my bones. Something in Maeve was learning how to take control. When Maeve turned 14, Trevor sent her to Canada on an art scholarship. He said it was the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance for her to grow in ways we couldn't give her at home. I remember watching her at the airport, standing tall in her new coat, barely turning back to wave goodbye. There was no trace of sadness in her eyes, only curiosity, confidence, maybe even relief. Shane only ate, then clung to my hand as we watched her disappear through the gate. I told him she'd come back often. She didn't. After that, our house in Texas felt quieter, lighter even. Shane went to a boarding school nearby, a gentle boy who loved animals and spent his weekends fixing birdhouses in the backyard. He grew up surrounded by warmth, by family dinners, and laughter, by my constant reminders that kindness was strength. Maeve, on the other hand, grew up somewhere colder in weather and in spirit. Letters from Canada came less and less. At first, she wrote about her classes, the city lights, and the people she met. Then the letters stopped altogether. When she returned for holidays, she was different. The little girl who once clung to Trevor now walked with poise and calculation. She carried herself like someone twice her age, her tone smooth, her eyes unreadable. Trevor admired her confidence, said she had become a woman of the world. I saw something else, a steeliness that didn't belong to a child. She learned how to charm people, to use her grace like a blade wrapped in silk. Compliments from her always came with conditions and smiles with motives. Shane adored her, at first, called her May, followed her around during her visits. But she kept her distance, sometimes mocking his innocence, calling him the golden boy. She said it with a laugh, but the way she looked at him wasn't playful. It was measured sharp. He never noticed. He saw her as the cool, successful sister he wanted to impress. I tried to tell him that admiration could be dangerous when not returned. He just smiled, said I worried too much. As years passed, their paths drifted further apart. Shane stayed soft, open-hearted, the kind of man who believed in people too easily. He inherited my calm, and Trevor's optimism, but not our caution. Maeve, meanwhile, built her own world full of ambition, beauty, and control. When they finally crossed paths again as adults, it would be clear they had not grown up as siblings, but as two strangers molded by entirely different worlds. It was supposed to be just another business trip. Shane was 30, working as a software engineer for a tech firm that had been invited to a fashion and design technology conference in New York. He wasn't expecting to see her there. Maeve Bennett, now a senior PR executive standing on stage under the lights, speaking with that same calm precision she'd always had as a teenager. He recognized her instantly, though 15 years had passed. When she caught his gaze from across the room, her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. They talked after the event. What began as polite conversation stretched into hours over coffee, then dinner. The years had blurred the boundaries of memory. To Shane, she wasn't his sister, just someone from the past who understood parts of his childhood no one else could. Maeve always composed, let the familiarity unfold naturally, as if fate were simply rewriting what had once been innocent. Within weeks, they were inseparable. When Trevor and I heard the news, my first reaction was disbelief. I remember holding the phone, my pulse thudding as Shane said her name. I thought it was a joke. When he confirmed it, something inside me went cold. I reminded him who Maeve was, our adopted daughter. He said gently that she was never legally adopted, that there was no document tying them as family. Trevor, after a long silence, agreed. He said we couldn't fight the law, that what mattered was their happiness. But I couldn't shake the unease. Some lines once crossed can never be redrawn. The wedding took place quietly in Austin, Texas, attended only by close friends and a few business associates. Maeve looked radiant in an ivory dress, confident and poised. Shane's smile was soft, trusting, completely unaware of the storm that was about to come. From that moment, she stepped effortlessly into control. She managed their accounts, changed ownership records, and convinced Shane that joint property was a sign of equality. Soon, her name was on every document, bank accounts, real estate, even Trevor's boutique business she offered to modernize. Within months, I realized she had built a web only she could untangle. Shane worked long hours handing her his paychecks without question. Maeve decided what was spent, what was saved, and what was none of my concern. She told me sweetly that I should rest, that I had done enough in life. But what she meant was clear: stay out of it. The girl I had once cradled was gone. In her place stood a woman who understood power better than love. After the wedding, Trevor did what he had always done when it came to money. He trusted too easily. He transferred most of our joint savings into an account that listed both his and Maeve's names. He said it was for convenience, so she could manage household expenses while he focused on business. I didn't argue then. After all, I wanted peace, and for a brief moment, it felt like the family had found balance again. But peace never lasts long when power shifts quietly behind closed doors. Within weeks, Maeve began reorganizing everything. One morning, I went to check an account statement, only to find the login page rejecting my password. Then another and another. When I asked, she smiled politely and said it was for our protection. Something about cybersecurity risks. I wanted to believe her, but when she changed the code to the safe and moved the financial files to her office, I understood what was really happening. She wasn't protecting us. She was closing the doors one by one until I was standing on the outside. She introduced a new system, her words wrapped in courtesy, but sharp beneath the surface. From now on, every household purchase would go through her approval. Groceries, medical bills, even my arthritis medication, I had to text her first. Sometimes she didn't respond for days, and I'd find myself cutting pills in half to make them last. When I brought it up to Trevor, he waved it off, saying Maeve was just trying to keep things organized. He didn't see the control tightening around us, or maybe he didn't want to. One afternoon, after she ignored my request for grocery money for the third time, I confronted her in the kitchen. The air between us felt colder than the tile floor beneath my feet. She stood by the counter, arms crossed, perfectly composed. I told her this arrangement was humiliating, that I had managed the family's finances long before she came into the picture. She didn't raise her voice. She just tilted her head slightly and said almost gently, "At your age, maybe it's time to rest instead of worrying about money." It was such a simple sentence spoken with calm precision, but it cut deeper than any shout could. In that moment, I realized she wasn't just managing the household, she was rewriting its hierarchy. Every rule, every password, every locked drawer was a reminder that I no longer belonged in the world I helped build. And somewhere in the quiet part of my mind, I began to understand this wasn't just about money. It was about erasing me piece by piece until there was nothing left to fight for. It started with something small, almost unnoticeable. A missing pearl ring, the one Trevor gave me on our 10th anniversary. I thought I must have misplaced it. Maybe left it in the bathroom after washing my hands. Maybe tucked it into a drawer absent-mindedly. But then the wedding necklace disappeared, and a week later, the antique watch that had belonged to my mother. One by one, the little pieces of my life began to vanish, like someone was quietly erasing my history. When I mentioned it to Trevor, he didn't look up from his laptop. He just said maybe I'd forgotten where I put them, that I'd been under stress lately. Shane laughed it off too, saying Maeve had probably tidied things up. That phrase stuck with me, tidied things up. Maeve's kind of tidying left everything looking perfect on the surface, but hollow underneath. The real sign came from the bank. I was checking our household account one morning when I noticed a string of small withdrawals, 200 here, 400 there, spaced a few days apart. At first, I thought they were normal purchases, but the pattern was too deliberate. The amounts were just under the threshold that would trigger a bank report. I had seen this kind of thing before years ago when I worked in accounting. It was called structuring dividing money into smaller transactions to avoid detection. Not illegal by itself, but designed to stay invisible. That night, I went over the statements again and again. Every withdrawal came from Trevor's signature, but I could tell whose hand was behind it. Maeve was clever, meticulous. She wouldn't risk something as crude as outright theft. No, she preferred something slower, quieter, and erosion. She was draining us drop by drop, dressing it up as routine expenses, gifts, or household maintenance. And Trevor, blinded by affection or denial, let it happen without question. I began to understand her strategy. She didn't need to steal everything at once. She only needed time and my silence. With every missing ring, every forgotten piece of jewelry, and every unexplained withdrawal, she was rewriting ownership one small move at a time. I realized then that she wasn't just taking things. She was claiming power, turning everything I had built into something that belonged to her. And the worst part was no one in this house seemed to notice except me. Maeve had a gift for performance. She didn't raise her voice or slam doors. No, her power was quieter, smoother, like a silk thread that could strangle without leaving a mark. Every evening became a stage where she played the perfect daughter-in-law, graceful and attentive. She would prepare elaborate dinners, light candles set the table like a magazine spread, and pour wine into Trevor's glass with that soft, practiced smile. "Mother looks tired," she would say sweetly. "Let me take care of everything tonight." Trevor, of course, was charmed. He thought she was a blessing, a modern woman who still valued family. But the moment he left the room, the air changed. Her face hardened. Her tone sliced through the silence like cold steel. "A housewife should know her place," she said once, her voice low but deliberate. I froze, the dish towel still in my hand. It wasn't anger. It was disdain. A warning. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The message was clear. This was her house now. I tried to talk to Shane to explain what was happening. He looked at me with confusion, then pity. Maeve had already wrapped him in her web. She had helped him buy shares in his company, negotiated his contracts, and even handled his taxes. He owed her more than money. He owed her his pride. "Mom," he said, "you're reading too much into things. Maeve's just trying to help." His voice was soft, but his distance was sharp enough to wound. Soon, I began questioning myself. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I was imagining things. The gaslighting worked like poison, slow, invisible, effective. I would walk into a room and forget what I came for, only to find Maeve watching me with that faint smirk that made me doubt my own thoughts. She would move objects, keys, documents, small things, and then act concerned when I couldn't find them. "Don't worry," she'd say gently, "memory slips happen at your age." At night, Trevor would sleep peacefully beside me, while I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every word she said. The cruelest part wasn't her insults. It was how easily she made everyone else believe she was kind. I began to feel invisible, a ghost haunting my own home. And for the first time, I realized the truth. Maeve wasn't destroying me in one blow. She was dismantling me piece by piece until I doubted not only my worth, but my sanity. There comes a point when pain turns into precision. For me, that moment arrived the night I realized no one would ever believe my words alone. I had spent months sounding like a bitter old woman complaining about a daughter-in-law everyone else saw as perfect. But I wasn't just hurt, I was trained. Once upon a time, I was an auditor, and I knew feelings meant nothing without evidence. So I decided to do what numbers had taught me all my life: document, verify, and wait. I ordered 2 small security cameras. Nothing fancy, just discreet and legal under Texas law. In this state, the homeowner has the right to record inside their own property as long as they consent to it. I chose my spots carefully, one inside a decorative picture frame in the living room, another hidden behind a row of wine bottles in the cabinet Trevor never touched. I spent an entire evening adjusting angles until I could see the reflection of the safe, the hallway, and part of the study door. The next morning, life continued as if nothing had changed. Maeve moved around the house in her usual way, graceful and efficient. But now I watched her differently, like a scientist observing a specimen. Under the soft lamplight of the living room, the tiny lens blinked once before going still. From that moment, it began to record every subtle act: the way she lingered near the safe, her quick glances at the cameras she thought were fake, her cautious fingers testing the handle when she believed I was asleep. Each night after Trevor and Shane had gone to bed, I locked myself in my room with my laptop. I watched the recordings in silence. Sometimes she was just pacing, sometimes whispering on the phone, her voice sharp, impatient. But other times, she opened drawers, checked envelopes, and took photos of documents. I took notes with the calm of a professional: date, time, duration, action. My hands trembled at first, but my handwriting stayed steady. I knew that one day these files, cold, factual, undeniable, would speak louder than I ever could. I didn't feel triumph, not yet. What I felt was a quiet return of control. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to her cruelty. I was preparing for it. Evidence doesn't shout. It waits, and so did I. That weekend, the house was quiet in a way that felt almost unnatural. Trevor and Shane had flown to Oklahoma for a cousin's funeral, leaving Maeve and me alone. She seemed pleased by the arrangement, humming softly as she walked through the house, her heels clicking like a metronome of control. I stayed in my reading room pretending to nap, but my heart knew better. I had checked the cameras that morning. I knew what she was capable of when no one was watching. By noon, the sound of her footsteps changed slower, deliberate. I heard the faint creak of the cabinet door, the shuffle of metal against metal. On my small monitor, hidden inside a drawer, the image flickered to life. There she was, standing in front of the safe, her hair neatly pinned, her expression calm, almost elegant. She keyed in the code without hesitation. The door swung open, and the light caught the stacks of cash inside my pension, my savings, $40,000 meant to secure the quiet years of my life. She didn't hesitate. One by one, she pulled out the envelopes, counted the bills, and smirked as if amused by the simplicity of it all. Then she said it, the same sentence that had once split my heart in two. "An old, useless woman like you doesn't need money anyway." Her voice dripped with contempt, her laugh low and sharp, echoing through the empty living room. She tossed the empty envelopes back into the safe, slammed the door, and brushed off her hands like she had just finished cleaning. The camera caught everything: her smirk, the curl of satisfaction in her lip, the glint of greed in her eyes. Watching it, I felt a strange calm wash over me. My hands trembled, but my mind was sharper than ever. Every movement, every cruel word was being recorded, time-stamped, clear, undeniable. For once, the truth didn't belong to her performance. It belonged to me. I sat back, whispering to myself, "You think I'm weak? You just signed your own sentence." My voice was steady, almost gentle, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. Years of humiliation, of silence, of pretending not to notice all of it, led to this moment. She thought she was untouchable, but the law doesn't sleep, and cameras don't lie. For the first time, I wasn't just the victim of her cruelty. I was the witness. And I knew when Trevor and Shane came home, Maeve's kingdom of manipulation would start to crumble, one truth at a time. That afternoon, the house felt unusually bright, filled with the hum of Maeve's heels echoing down the marble hallway. She entered as if she owned not just the house, but the air inside it, her perfume preceding her like a royal announcement. Sunlight caught the metallic sheen of her shopping bags, Chanel, Gucci, Dior, all swinging from her wrist like trophies of conquest. She called out a cheerful, "I'm home," but her tone wasn't meant for family. It was meant for display. Trailing behind her was a woman I had never seen before. Younger, striking with chestnut hair cascading over a tight silk dress and lips painted the color of wine. "This is Ashlyn Maeve," announced her voice, sweet as honey, but edged with something sharper. "My best friend from college." Ashlyn smiled faintly, though her eyes avoided mine, glancing around the house, instead curious, assessing, almost guilty. Maeve led her straight into the living room, spreading the designer bags across the sofa, like spoils of war. "Look at this," she said, unwrapping boxes one by one. Perfume, jewelry, shoes, handbags, all from the family fund. My husband never checks. Her laughter tinkled through the room, a sound too polished to be genuine. I watched from the doorway, unseen, the faint light from the chandelier, reflecting off the tiny camera lens hidden in the frame above them. Ashlyn raised an eyebrow, letting out a low, teasing laugh. "You really know how to handle those rich old men, don't you?" Her tone was light, but cutting, the kind of comment meant for private circles, not polite company. Maeve didn't flinch. She simply tossed her hair back and said, "Experience, darling. Some of us learn early how to survive." Their eyes met in silent understanding, a language of manipulation shared between predators. In that moment, I realized something deeper. Ashlyn wasn't just a friend. There was a power dynamic between them, something transactional and dangerous. Maeve spoke to her not like a companion, but like a partner in a secret. The way Ashlyn's gaze darted toward the upstairs hallway told me she knew too much about our family, about Shane, about money. I stayed hidden, every word sinking like a stone. On the surface, it was just two women gossiping over luxury goods, but beneath the laughter was a different truth. a partnership built on greed, deceit, and calculated charm. The camera captured it all: the designer bags, the cruel smiles, the casual confession of theft disguised as confidence. Maeve thought she was untouchable. She had no idea she'd just handed me the next piece of my case. I waited until their laughter had settled before stepping into the living room. The silver tray trembled slightly in my hands, but I kept my smile steady. Years of hosting dinners and smoothing over family tempers had taught me the art of composure. "You're home already," I said gently, setting the tray on the coffee table. "Did you have a good time shopping?" My tone was light, almost motherly, the kind of voice that disarmed before it questioned. Maeve turned sharply, surprise flashing across her face for just a second before she recovered. Her smile bloomed instantly bright and hollow. "Oh, just a few little things," she said, waving her manicured hand toward the sea of designer bags. "You know how sales are this time of year, Mother. We couldn't resist." She laughed lightly, and Ashlyn joined in, though her eyes flickered uneasily between us. I poured the tea slowly, letting the silence stretch, just long enough to make her shift in her seat. The clink of porcelain echoed faintly against the marble floor. "That's lovely," I said softly. "It's always nice to treat yourself." Then I looked up and met her eyes, calm, kind, but unwavering. Beneath the table, my phone vibrated. I typed a short message, fingers steady despite the tremor in my chest. "Come home now, it's time." I hit send. Somewhere on the highway from Austin Airport, Trevor would read those words. The conversation carried on with small talk about travel work and business expenses. Maeve's voice stayed light, but her posture tightened. She could sense something beneath the surface, a shift in tone she couldn't quite name. She reached for her cup, eyes scanning the room in a quick, nervous sweep. The camera hidden in the wine cabinet caught everything: the flick of her gaze, the forced laughter, the faint tremor in her fingers as she lifted her cup. Ashlyn tried to break the tension, complimenting the decor, but her voice wavered too. She was young, perhaps clever, but not trained for this kind of theater. Maeve, though, continued her act flawlessly, adjusting her necklace, crossing her legs, smiling like a woman who still believed she held the upper hand. She had no idea that every second of her confidence was being recorded: the tilt of her chin, the lies behind her charm, the moment before her mask would begin to crack. I sat back in my chair, sipping my tea. The warmth steadied me. "You girls must be tired," I said quietly. "Why don't you rest a while? Dinner will be ready soon." My voice remained sweet, steady. Only my eyes betrayed the truth. They were no longer pleading. They were measuring, watching, waiting. 30 minutes later, the sound of the front door shattered the air like thunder. The living room fell silent as Trevor stepped in, his usually calm face carved into something hard and unreadable. He didn't greet anyone. He didn't even take off his shoes. He just stood there for a moment, scanning the room: the shopping bags, the untouched tea, the frozen smiles. Then, with a single motion, he threw his coat onto the chair, his eyes locking on Maeve with a cold precision I had never seen before. "Do you have any idea," he said, his voice low but trembling with control, "how many cameras are in this house?" For the first time since I'd known her, Maeve didn't have an answer. Her face went pale. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Then the handbag slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. Credit cards, receipts, and crumpled cash scattered across the marble tiles, a glittering mess of guilt laid bare. Ashlyn took a step back, her face draining of color. The silence stretched thick and suffocating until Trevor reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen. The room filled with the mechanical click of a recording. The image appeared: Maeve standing by the safe, her reflection sharp under the lamp. The video showed her counting the money, her expression smug and cruel. And then her voice, cold, mocking unmistakably, hers cut through the air. An old, useless woman like you doesn't need money anyway. The words echoed around the room like a curse. Maeve's hand flew to her mouth. That's not, she stammered. But Trevor didn't let her finish. He turned the screen toward her, his eyes burning with quiet fury. It's your voice, Maeve. Your hands. Your smile. Everything you've said. Everything you've done, it's all here. Ashlyn backed toward the door, whispering that she should go, but no one moved to stop her. Trevor's focus never left Maeve. He took a deep breath, the kind that comes before judgment, and said softly, almost sorrowfully, I welcomed you into this family. I trusted you with everything. And this is what you did to my wife. Maeve sank into the couch, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The walls of her confidence, once unshakable, began to crumble in front of everyone. April remained still, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes calm. For the first time in years, the truth stood naked in the room, and it didn't need her to say a word. Ashlyn's face drained of color, her confidence melting into panic. She took a step back, then another, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. The glamour she wore like armor was gone, now replaced by the unmistakable look of someone cornered. I didn't know, she stammered, her voice trembling. Her eyes darted between Trevor and Maeve, searching for an escape that no longer existed. I spoke quietly, my tone calm, but cutting through the tension like glass. If I'm not mistaken, I said, Miss Ashlyn once worked at Trevor's boutique, the one that recently reported missing inventory. Ashlyn froze. For a moment, no one breathed. Trevor's eyes locked on her, cold and unwavering. That's right, he said, voice steady but tight. We've already filed a report with the police about those missing luxury items, and I imagine they'll be very interested to speak with you. His words fell heavy in the room, each syllable deliberate, inescapable. Ashlyn's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her eyes widened, the weight of realization crashing over her. Beside her, Maeve's mask finally cracked. The elegant poise, the smug control, all gone. She grabbed Ashlyn's wrist, her voice a hiss of desperation. Run, she whispered. Then louder. Run. In an instant, chaos replaced the silence. The two women stumbled toward the door, nearly tripping over the discarded shopping bags. The front door banged open, and the sharp clatter of heels echoed down the driveway as they bolted toward the car. I didn't move. Neither did Trevor. The only sound left inside the house was the faint hum of the hidden camera, still recording, catching every frantic second of their escape. On the floor, the aftermath told its own story. Designer bags overturned, receipts scattered like confetti, and amid them, a thick envelope half crumpled beneath the coffee table. Trevor bent down to pick it up. Inside were transaction slips, wire transfers, all to the same name, Ashlyn Moore. The amounts were small, but frequent, structured just enough to avoid suspicion. Proof that their partnership went far beyond friendship. Trevor handed the envelope to me without a word. I placed it gently on the tray, where the teacups still sat, their contents, now cold. She thought she was cleaning us out, I said softly. But all she did was leave her fingerprints everywhere. Outside, the sound of an engine roared to life, then faded into the distance. The house, for the first time in years, felt still again. Not peaceful yet, but steady. Evidence had a way of restoring gravity. The sound of the car door slamming echoed through the house, followed by the high-pitched squeal of tires tearing across the driveway. Then silence. A silence so thick it seemed to press against the walls. Trevor sank heavily into the armchair, his breath ragged, his hands trembling, as if the weight of years had just collapsed onto him. Across the room, I reached for the remote, and turned off the camera feed. The last frozen frame of Maeve's fleeing car vanished into black. Trevor leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice breaking between disbelief and grief. "I can't believe it. That girl." His words hung in the air unfinished. I looked at him, calm composed my tone, quiet but firm. "Believe it or not," I said, "truth doesn't ask for permission." For a long moment, he said nothing. The man who had once trusted too easily now stared at the floor, eyes clouded with regret. I could almost hear the years of guilt settling into his shoulders, the years of defending her, of ignoring the signs I tried to show him. Finally, he exhaled, his voice rough. "I let her into this family." I walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder, gentle but steady. "You didn't let her in," I said softly. "She forced her way in. And now she's walked herself out." He nodded faintly, then reached for his phone. "I should call Shane," he muttered. But I stopped him, placing my hand over his. "No," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not yet. Let him see it with his own eyes. Some truths can't be told, they have to be witnessed." Trevor's hand froze midair, and after a pause, he lowered the phone. The quiet returned, not empty, but heavy, like the calm after a storm. I stood and began to gather the fallen shopping bags scattered across the floor. The glossy labels, Chanel, Gucci, Dior, glimmered under the cold overhead light. I placed them, one by one, on the table. Each tag, a relic of deceit, each logo, a reflection of greed that had devoured everything human in her. As I lifted the last one, the faint scent of Maeve's perfume lingered, sharp and artificial. I looked at it for a moment, then let it fall into the trash bin. The scene around me felt almost ceremonial, evidence giving way to closure. Trevor sat in silence, his face pale but clearer than before. Outside, the night had settled over the house like a shroud, but inside, for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. When you've lived your life balancing ledgers, you learn that emotions don't win. Battles evidence does. That night, as the house settled into uneasy silence, I sat at my desk with my reading glasses perched on my nose and opened my old laptop. The faint glow of the screen lit the lined notebook beside me, where I had already started a column of notes. Dates, times, transactions, behavioral patterns, every detail that might seem trivial now could later become the difference between truth and manipulation. I knew the law. The hidden camera footage would only hold up in court if I could prove it was recorded for the purpose of protecting my personal assets. So I began to build context around it, every clip paired with a dated note, every event matched to a reason. February 18th, 7:42 p.m. Maeve accessing the safe. Evidence of unauthorized removal of funds. I documented it all, careful, precise, unemotional. Pain had taught me discipline. Betrayal had taught me patience. By midnight, I copied the video files onto an encrypted USB drive, too, in fact, because redundancy was another habit no accountant ever forgets. One would stay in my fireproof box. The other I sealed inside an envelope addressed to Diana Welch, our family attorney. Diana specialized in elder financial abuse cases, the kind that exposed children or in-laws who exploited seniors under the illusion of care. I wrote her a short note. Evidence enclosed. I believe the pattern now meets federal threshold for financial exploitation. Please advise on next steps. Trevor joined me the next morning, his expression grim but focused. Together, we retrieved years of bank records. Page after page, we marked the withdrawals that aligned with Maeve's appearances in the footage. Cash movements that once looked innocent now formed a timeline of theft. Trevor printed statements while I logged each entry into Excel column A for date B, for amount C, for method D, for description E, for reference video clip. Hours passed. The spreadsheet grew. Where others might see loss, I saw structure taking shape. For every cruel act Maeve committed there was now a line of data clean and irrefutable. I color-coded them red for unauthorized transactions, yellow for suspicious patterns, green for verified evidence. By the end, my heartbreak had turned into a financial report, ready for a courtroom. As I saved the file and closed the laptop, I realized this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about reclaiming order, proving that dignity like numbers doesn't lie. When Diana Welch took over the case, everything moved quickly. She had handled dozens of elder financial abuse cases before, but this combination of domestic betrayal and corporate manipulation was different. Within a week, she filed a formal report with the Austin Police Department, classifying the matter under theft and fraudulent transfers. Her voice was calm when she called me, but I could hear the resolve beneath it. "We're not just looking at stolen money anymore, April," she said. "We're looking at a criminal operation." Detective Officer Blake Rios was assigned to the case, a specialist from the department's Economic Crimes Unit. He arrived at our home 2 days later, his tone measured professional. He introduced himself to Trevor first, explaining that because the suspicious transactions involved funds from Trevor's boutique business, the investigation would extend to the company's accounts. "It's not just personal theft," he said, flipping through the preliminary report. "It looks like money laundering done from the inside." Trevor's face tightened, a mix of shock and disbelief. For years, he had built his boutiques on trust and aesthetics. Now that same trust had been weaponized against him. Officer Rios and his team began tracing the electronic footprints left behind. Every digital transfer, every invoice Maeve had approved under the guise of marketing expenses was pulled and analyzed. What started as small withdrawals, hundreds here, thousands there, soon led to a pattern of payments wired to an unfamiliar entity, AM Lux Imports. The name rang no bells for Trevor or me, but to investigators it stood out immediately. The company was newly registered with no physical office, no real staff, only a post office box, and a single registered owner, Ashlyn Moore. The discovery hit like a crack of thunder. What had seemed like a personal betrayal was now revealing itself as a financial network built on deception. Through subpoenaed records and surveillance, Officer Rios's unit uncovered the truth. AM Lux Imports was a shell company used to funnel counterfeit luxury goods from Mexico into the United States. These fake products were then mixed into Trevor's legitimate inventory, unknowingly helping the operation wash the merchandise through his reputable brand. The boutiques, once his pride, had been turned into tools for laundering illegal goods. When Diana explained this to me, I felt both fury and relief. Fury at how deep Maeve's deceit had gone, and relief that the law was finally catching up to her. This wasn't just about justice for me anymore. It was about exposing the rot she had planted inside the very foundation of our family. And for the first time, the system was on my side. The investigation grew wider with every passing day, like a net spreading through layers of deceit. Officer Rios and his team pulled footage from every boutique under Trevor's chain, cross-referencing transactions, delivery logs, and refund slips. What they found was worse than anyone expected. Several return packages neatly cataloged in the system as standard exchanges turned out to be counterfeit goods, cheap imitations swapped in for authentic pieces. The scam had been running for months, maybe longer, right under Trevor's name. At first, Trevor refused to believe it. "It must be a mistake," he kept saying, pacing the living room, clutching the report until the paper wrinkled in his hands. But the evidence was relentless. In one video clip, Maeve and Ashlyn appeared together in a store, smiling for the camera, carrying handbags marked Special Return Authorization. They walked straight into the back office, bypassing protocol, flashing a document with Trevor's electronic signature. It was forged perfectly, forged. The digital trail confirmed Maeve had used her access to replicate his approval stamp. One employee, nervous but relieved to finally speak, admitted to the police that the two women came often, always charming, always confident. They said it was part of a promotional exchange, she confessed. I didn't question it because the paperwork looked official. Now those same employees were witnesses in a case that had grown from family betrayal into organized fraud. When Trevor saw the compiled footage, Maeve's laugh, her ease, her deliberate deceit, he sat back in stunned silence. The man who had spent decades building a reputation for honesty now faced the realization that his own family had used that trust as a weapon. She didn't just steal from me, he said finally, his voice hollow. She destroyed everything my name stood for. Through it all, I remained composed. There was no satisfaction in watching the damage unfold, only clarity. The more crimes she commits, I said quietly, closing another binder of printed records, the easier it is to prove them. I began assembling what would later be called the master file, a binder nearly 2 inches thick. Inside were spreadsheets of bank withdrawals, screenshots of transaction stills from security cameras, and transcripts of every fraudulent exchange. Each page was labeled and time-stamped, each clip trimmed and archived. The accountant in me had returned not for profit this time, but for justice. While Trevor mourned what was lost, I focused on what could be restored: the truth, the proof, and the power of precision. Maeve's greed had started this. My discipline would end it. The rain came down in steady sheets that night, turning the streets of New Braunfels into ribbons of silver beneath the floodlights. For 2 weeks, the Austin Police Department had been coordinating with local officers to monitor a quiet storage facility on the edge of town, an unassuming row of metal units that until now had held the final secrets of Maeve and Ashland's empire. The operation began at midnight. Officers waited in their unmarked vehicles' engines, off rain, tapping softly against the windshields. Inside one van, Officer Blake Rios reviewed the evidence file photos of counterfeit goods transaction slips and April's meticulous spreadsheets. "We have enough to shut them down," he murmured. At 12:47 a.m., headlights appeared through the rain. A black SUV pulled into the lot, parking near Unit 14B. Maeve stepped out first, wearing a trench coat, her posture confident, her movements quick. Ashland followed, glancing nervously around as she unlocked the storage door. They thought they were alone. They thought their plan to move one last shipment of new designs before disappearing was foolproof. But as the door rolled open, the first officer's voice cut through the sound of rain. "Austin Police Department. Step away from the vehicle." The two women froze. For a heartbeat, silence. Then chaos. Maeve turned sharply, shouting, "You can't do this! I'm the daughter-in-law of Trevor Harlow. You have no right." But her words were swallowed by the thunder as officers surrounded the area. The warrant was read aloud, clear and precise, listing charges of theft, fraud, and conspiracy. Maeve's hands shook as the cuffs clicked around her wrists. Ashland was silent, eyes wide, rain streaming down her face, as if the night itself had judged them both. Inside the unit, officers found over 200 counterfeit designer items, neatly packed and labeled, for shipment bags, shoes, watches, all paired with falsified receipts. More damning still were the financial ledgers and hard drives that matched the exact data April had compiled. Every fraudulent transfer, every fake invoice, every lie had come full circle. By dawn, the story was already on local news. Luxury counterfeit ring tied to prominent Austin family. the headline read. I sat in the kitchen, the morning light cold and blue against the window. Trevor watched the broadcast in silence. When the anchor mentioned Maeve's name, I simply sighed. We didn't need to destroy her, I said quietly. Her own greed already did that for us. When Shane pulled into the driveway, the flashing blue and red lights were the first thing he saw. Officers were still moving in and out of the house, their radios crackling in the cold morning air. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still wet, reflecting the lights like fragments of broken glass. Trevor sat on the living room sofa, motionless, his face pale and hollow. The air inside felt heavier than silence. I rose slowly, holding a sealed envelope in my hands. Sit down, Shane, I said quietly. He obeyed his confusion, showing in the tremor of his breath. I placed the envelope in front of him and waited. He hesitated before opening it, his fingers shaking as though they already knew what they would find. Inside was a single flash drive and a stack of printed photographs, the same evidence that had broken his father's heart. I didn't speak. I just watched as he plugged the flash drive into his laptop. The video started playing grainy but clear. Maeve's voice filled the room, the same cold, contemptuous tone that had haunted me for months. An old, useless woman like you doesn't need money anyway, she said, laughing as she counted the bills from my safe. The sound hit Shane like a blow. His face drained of color, his hands frozen on the keyboard. No, he whispered almost to himself. No, she wouldn't. But the truth left no room for denial. When the video ended, he flipped to the next page in the file, a police photograph. Maeve and Ashlyn handcuffed their heads, bowed under the harsh fluorescent light of the station. For a long moment, Shane just stared, as if trying to make sense of how the woman he'd loved could become this stranger. Then the photo slipped from his hand and fluttered to the floor. Trevor didn't move. He just looked at his son with tired eyes, eyes that had seen too much disappointment to offer comfort. Shane pressed his hands against his face, his shoulders shaking. I defended her, he said, voice cracking. I chose her over you, Mom. I stepped closer, my tone calm but steady. You chose what you believed was love, I said. Now you know what love shouldn't cost. No one spoke for a while. The hum of police radios outside faded as officers began to leave. The house felt stripped bare of lies, of pride, of illusion. Trevor exhaled deeply, almost a sigh of release. Shane sat there broken but silent as the morning light crept across the floor, illuminating the fallen photograph between us, the symbol of everything lost and everything finally revealed. By the following week, the story had spread like wildfire. Every local station in Austin carried the same headline, beautiful PR executive arrested for luxury theft and money laundering. The name Maeve Harlow was suddenly everywhere on television, in tabloids, on the lips of curious neighbors who once praised her elegance. The once admired daughter-in-law of the Harlow family had become a spectacle, and the quiet suburban street outside our house turned into a circus of flashing lights and reporters shouting questions into the rain. The police had arranged for Maeve to sign the final evidence acknowledgement form at our home. It was a matter of procedure. The safe, the hidden cameras, the stolen jewelry were all part of the case file, and this house was officially listed as a crime scene. By mid-morning, a patrol car pulled up the driveway, its headlights cutting through the mist. The sound of the engine drew an instant crowd. Neighbors peeked from porches' umbrellas, bloomed like dark flowers, and camera shutters began to click. Then the rear door opened. Maeve stepped out in handcuffs, flanked by 2 officers. Even now, she tried to hold herself upright, chin high, her hair neatly tied, makeup faint but deliberate, as if still performing for an audience. The reporters swarmed closer. Maeve, Do you have a statement? Did you really steal from your own family? How long has this been going on? Their questions blurred into a chaotic hum. Maeve's composure cracked just slightly. Her jaw tightened as the flashes blinded her. From inside, I watched through the rain-speckled window. Trevor sat beside me on the couch motionless, his hands clasped tightly. We said nothing. Words had long lost their meaning in this house. Outside, Maeve hesitated at the front door, refusing to look at the officers as she signed the form acknowledging the seizure of evidence. Her signature, once elegant, once proud, looked small, now trembling under the drizzle. When she turned, the crowd surged forward again, shouting, snapping photos, recording videos. One of the neighbors whispered just loud enough for others to hear, "That's what happens when greed catches up." The phrase lingered in the damp air, cruel and true. Maeve stood by the table, her wrists still cuffed, the metal glinting under the pale light. The officers allowed her to sign the last few documents as part of procedure, but the room felt less like an office and more like a courtroom. Her hair was tangled. Her mascara had run in dark streaks down her cheeks, and her once pristine blouse clung to her like a reminder of everything she'd lost. She kept her head down, avoiding everyone's gaze, especially Trevor's. He sat across from her, silent for a long moment, his hands clasped so tightly the veins stood out beneath his skin. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse but steady. "You can buy beauty," he said slowly, "but you can't buy integrity." The words sliced through the air like a blade. Maeve flinched slightly, her shoulders trembling, but she didn't look up. Trevor reached into a folder and slid a photograph across the table. The glossy paper caught the light, an image of counterfeit handbags stacked in a warehouse, each one stamped with the logo of his boutique. "Do you recognize this?" he asked. Maeve hesitated, then gave the faintest nod. Trevor's eyes darkened. "That logo represents 20 years of work. My name, my reputation." "You didn't just steal money from my mother," he said, his voice tightening. "You stole the dignity I spent a lifetime building, and that's something you can't buy back, not even if you sold your soul." Maeve's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. The woman who once commanded rooms with charm and confidence was now reduced to silence, her arrogance stripped away. The sound of the rain outside filled the gap between them, soft, yet relentless, like the echo of truth itself. Trevor leaned back in his chair, the anger in his eyes slowly giving way to exhaustion. "You wanted everything," he continued quietly. "The money, the house, the power. But in chasing all that, you forgot what it means to be human. And now you'll face justice, not because I hate you, but because you became something I can't recognize anymore." Maeve's breath hitched, her shoulders curling inward. For the first time, she seemed small, not because of the handcuffs, but because she finally understood the weight of what she'd destroyed. When the officer signaled for her to leave, she turned her face away, tears cutting through the streaks of ruined makeup. Trevor didn't watch her go. He just closed the folder, the sound sharp and final. The line between love and disgust, between humanity and greed, had never been clearer. Maeve's composure finally cracked. She dropped to her knees on the marble floor, her voice breaking into a sob that pierced the heavy air of the room. "I did it for Shane," she cried, her words tumbling over themselves. "Everything I did was for him, to give him a better future, to make sure he never had to struggle like you did." Her tone swung wildly between guilt and justification, desperation and pride. Tears streaked her face, mixing with the smudges of mascara that made her look more like a ghost than a victim. The officers standing nearby exchanged glances, but said nothing. They'd seen this before, the plea for pity, the performance of regret. Maeve clutched at the edge of the table, looking up at Trevor, her eyes wide and frantic. "You have to believe me," she begged. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I was trying to protect our family." Her voice cracked again, now trembling as if she could still twist the truth into sympathy. Outside, the reporters pressed against the windows, cameras flashing through the rain, feeding on every word. Trevor didn't respond. His expression was unreadable, carved in stone. The silence stretched painful and long. And then from behind him, I stepped forward. My heels clicked softly against the floor, a sound that made Maeve look up. I met her eyes. No anger now, only clarity, the kind that comes after years of betrayal, have burned themselves out. "No," I said quietly, my voice steady enough to cut through the storm. "You didn't do it for Shane." Maeve froze, her mouth still open mid-plea. I took another step closer, my gaze unwavering. "You did it because you wanted everything: money, status, control. You wanted to be admired, feared, and envied. You did it for everything, except your conscience." The words hung in the air like a verdict. For a moment, the entire room went still. Then from outside, a camera flash exploded through the window. Catching the exact second, Maeve's face collapsed, her pride, her excuses all melting into shame. The light illuminated everything: the woman once humiliated, now standing tall, and the one who had once sneered, now reduced to pleading in cuffs. Trevor looked at me, his eyes softening for the first time that day. The reporters outside captured the image that would appear in every paper the next morning. April Harlow, poised and unflinching, standing as both witness and symbol of justice, finally served. The door creaked open, and every sound in the room seemed to stop. Shane stood there in the doorway, drenched from the rain, eyes bloodshot and weary. In his hand was a thick folder, the police report, that had ended any remaining illusion of who his wife really was. His face was pale, his movements slow, as though each step toward the table required more strength than he had left. When he spoke, his voice was flat, the kind that comes when grief has burned itself into calm. "I just signed the emergency divorce papers," he said quietly. Diana handled it. Maeve turned sharply, disbelief flashing across her tear-streaked face. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. Then she rushed toward him, hands trembling, her voice rising in panic. "You can't leave me, Shane. Everything I did, every single thing was for you." Her sobs filled the room, raw and loud, as if volume alone could turn back time. She tried to grab his sleeve, but Shane stepped back, his expression unreadable, the same detached sorrow one reserves for a stranger. For a long moment, no one spoke. The rain outside hit the windows harder, like a relentless drumbeat marking the end of something irreversible. Then silently, Shane reached into the folder and pulled out a photograph. He placed it on the table between them. Maeve looked down and froze. It was a picture of her and Ashlyn taken from the confiscated phone mid-kiss in a hotel room. The same friend she had sworn meant nothing, the same partner in crime she had blamed for everything. Her breath caught in her throat. "That's not," she started, but Shane cut her off. His voice was quiet, but each word landed like a hammer. "You didn't do this for me," he said. He paused, eyes locking on hers. "You did it for yourself." The words lingered heavy and final. Maeve's body seemed to fold inward, her knees giving way as she collapsed onto the floor. Her sobs turned silent, replaced by the hollow sound of rain and the distant click of a camera outside. The woman who once ruled every room she entered now looked small, cornered by her own lies. Shane stood still for a moment, then turned away. His face was empty, not angry, not grieving, just finished. As he walked out, Trevor closed his eyes, and I felt a single tear run down my cheek, not for her, but for the years we'd lost to deceit. That was the moment the last illusion broke. Love, loyalty, forgiveness all stripped away, leaving only truth, cold and undeniable. The rain hadn't stopped since the trial. It was the soft kind, steady and endless, the kind that seemed to wash the world clean while leaving your soul untouched. Shane stood in the doorway of the house that had once been full of laughter, where every room used to echo with Maeve's voice and the sound of shared plans. Now it was silent, too silent. The faint scent of her perfume still lingered in the air, a haunting reminder of what had been and what could never be again. He moved slowly, as if afraid the house itself might crumble under the weight of memory. The living room was still immaculate, as if she had just stepped out for groceries and would return any minute with that familiar smile. But upstairs, the bedroom told another story. Dust had begun to settle on the dresser, and the bed looked untouched since the day of her arrest. Shane walked to the closet, the one he had avoided for weeks. He opened it carefully, the hinges creaking in protest. Her clothes still hung there. Silk dresses, crisp blouses, heels lined up in neat precision. He began to pack them into boxes, methodical but numb, until something caught his eye. A small wooden box pushed deep into the corner, hidden behind a stack of scarves. He hesitated, then pulled it out. The latch clicked softly. Inside lay a collection of jewelry, delicate old-fashioned pieces that shimmered faintly under the dim light. His breath caught. He recognized them instantly. His mother's pearl necklace, her ruby earrings, the brooch she wore every Christmas. The pieces that had gone missing months ago. Shane's hands trembled as he lifted each piece, the truth pressing down heavier with every touch. Beneath the jewelry was a thick envelope. He opened it and froze. Dozens of photographs spilled out onto the bed. Maeve and Ashlyn, smiling, embracing, kissing. Poses that left no room for denial. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It was printed, tangible, cruel. But then among the photographs, one image stopped him cold. A childhood photo faintly familiar. Maeve, no older than 5, standing beside his father in an old photo from Mexico. The memory hit him like a blow. He remembered that trip, how his father had returned home with a quiet smile and a little girl he called a child who needed a family. Maeve. The girl he'd grown up calling his sister. The jewelry fell from his hands, clattering against the floor. For a long time he couldn't breathe. Betrayal had many faces, but this was the cruelest. It wasn't just his marriage that had been destroyed. It was the very foundation of his family, rewritten in deceit. The storm outside raged on, but inside, the house only silence remained, the kind that doesn't end when the rain stops. Shane sat on the floor, his back against the bed, the rain outside echoing like his own heartbeat, uneven, relentless, hollow. His face was buried in his hands, his shoulders trembling with the kind of grief that comes too late. The open box lay beside him, the photographs scattered like broken glass across the carpet. His voice came out low, cracked, almost childlike. "I didn't believe you, Mom." The words hung in the air, fragile and heavy. I stepped into the room quietly, the wooden floor creaking beneath my feet. For a long moment, I didn't speak. The sight of my son, my once cheerful, confident boy, now crumpled on the ground like a man aged by his own choices, was almost too much to bear. I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, but lies would only cheapen the truth he had finally learned. So I knelt beside him and rested my hand on his shoulder. He didn't look up, but his breathing steadied just slightly under my touch. I could feel his guilt thick as the humid air after the storm. "She fooled all of us," he whispered, his voice shaking. "But I should have seen it. I should have protected you." I shook my head gently. "No, Shane," I said softly. "You shouldn't have seen it sooner. You were supposed to love. That's what makes you human." He looked up, then his eyes red, searching mine for something, absolution maybe, or understanding. I brushed a strand of wet hair from his forehead and said the only truth that mattered. "There are lessons," I told him quietly, "that only loss can teach. Sometimes you have to lose everything before you understand who truly loves you. The words seemed to settle between us, warm and painful, all at once. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since all this began, he didn't fight the pain. He let it in. Because that, too, was part of healing. At the door, Trevor stood silently, one hand gripping the frame. His glasses fogged, and he removed them, wiping away both condensation and tears. He said nothing. He didn't need to. We both knew this was the moment our son truly grew up, not through success or pride, but through the humbling weight of truth. Outside, the rain began to slow its rhythm, softening into quiet drops. The storm had passed, but its echo would stay for a long time, a reminder that karma doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it simply teaches. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with whispers and the rustle of papers. The seal of Travis County gleamed above the judge's bench, steady and unyielding. Maeve sat between her two attorneys, her once perfect posture, now slumped wrists resting on the cold steel of handcuffs. Her face was pale, drained of the arrogance that had once lit her every smile. The verdict had been read slowly, each word like the toll of a bell that signaled the end of her carefully built illusion. The court finds the defendant Maeve Harlow guilty on all 3 counts. The judge announced his tone, firm yet measured. Grand larceny, financial fraud, brand counterfeiting. The room fell silent except for the faint clicking of a journalist's pen and the muffled gasp of someone in the back row. The gavel came down once. The sentence is 5 years in state prison, with mandatory restitution of $180,000 to be paid to the victims, Mr. Trevor Harlow's boutique business and Mrs. April Harlow's personal assets. Maeve's head dropped lower with every word. The sound of the cuffs clinking echoed faintly in the stillness. To her right, Ashlyn stood trembling as her own fate was read, 2 years of probation and suspended sentence granted for full cooperation with the investigation. Her testimony had exposed everything: the false invoices, the warehouse, deals the plan Maeve had crafted down to the last fraudulent signature. When the bailiff motioned for Maeve to stand, she rose slowly, her expression vacant, her eyes glassy and far away. For the first time, there was no fight left in her. No calculated charm, no biting retort, just a hollow woman stripped bare by her own greed. I sat beside Trevor in the front row, my hands clasped together. The moment the gavel struck for the final time, I felt no triumph, only the quiet weight of closure. Justice, I realized, wasn't loud. It didn't come with applause or satisfaction. It came with stillness, with the knowledge that the law had spoken where words once failed. As Maeve was led out of the courtroom, she looked up just once, perhaps searching for someone to pity her. Her gaze brushed past me, and for a fleeting second, our eyes met. There was no hatred in mine, only the calm certainty of a woman who had survived and prevailed. She looked away first. The same woman who once mocked me as an old, useless lady was now defeated not by force, but by evidence, logic, and the system she thought she could outsmart. After the trial, the news wouldn't stop coming. Everywhere I turned, television, newspapers, even the radio, the name Harlow echoed back at me. But for once, it wasn't tied to scandal or disgrace. It was about survival, about rebuilding. Trevor and I made a choice early on: we wouldn't hide. We would face the truth head on. On the morning of the press conference, I stood beside him in front of the Harlow Vintage Boutique, the same one we had nearly lost to deceit. The crowd was larger than I'd expected: reporters, customers, even strangers who had followed the story. Trevor adjusted the microphone, his voice calm, but full of quiet power. "We forgive," he said, "but we do not forget. What matters is not how you fall, but how you rise and who you choose to be after." I felt tears press at the corners of my eyes, but I kept my chin high. Behind him, the new banner unfurled in the breeze: Harlow Vintage. Integrity never goes out of style. The words shimmered beneath the Texas sun, and for the first time in months, I felt proud of our name again. Inside the store, I arranged a row of vintage silk scarves, real ones this time, not counterfeit lies. Each piece had a story, a history, something genuine. That's what I wanted people to feel when they walked in. I told our staff fashion can fade, but honesty doesn't. Let this place remind people that truth is the finest fabric of all. A few weeks later, an invitation arrived. They wanted me to speak at the Financial Abuse Awareness for Seniors Conference in Austin. I hesitated at first. My story was painful. It exposed wounds I'd rather keep private. But Trevor held my hand and said softly, "Tell them what strength looks like." So I did. Standing on that stage, facing hundreds of people, many of them women my age, I felt my voice steady. Old age isn't weakness, I told them. It's the clarity that comes after surviving what was meant to break you. We don't lose value with years, we gain wisdom, and that's something no one can steal. The room rose to its feet, a wave of applause echoing through the hall. Some women wiped their eyes. Others nodded quietly, as if they too had been waiting to hear someone say those words. I realized then that my pain had turned into purpose. Today, when people see Harlow Vintage, they no longer think of betrayal. They think of strength, endurance, and integrity. I didn't just reclaim my dignity, I rebuilt it, one truth at a time. And perhaps that's what justice really means. Not revenge, but renewal. They called it the Harlow House Betrayal. Every newspaper headline, every news segment, every podcast repeated those words as if the name itself carried a warning. It wasn't just a scandal. It was a mirror showing people how greed could grow quietly inside a family that looked perfect from the outside. For months, I avoided reading the articles, but eventually I did. Not because I wanted to relive the pain, but because I needed to see it for what it was, the final chapter of a story that had already ended. Trevor and I decided to sell the old mansion. Too many memories lingered in its halls, some beautiful, others unbearable. We moved to a smaller house on the outskirts of Austin where mornings were quiet and the air smelled of cedar and rain. Trevor found peace in routine again. He volunteered at local shelters, mending furniture and repairing things for people who had less than we did. I spent my days tending to a garden full of roses, white for forgiveness, red for strength, and yellow for resilience. Every time I pruned a stem, it felt like cutting away a piece of bitterness that no longer belonged in my heart. Shane took longer to heal. He resigned from his job, started therapy, and for a while kept to himself. Guilt is a heavy chain. It doesn't break easily. But with time and patience and silence, he began to stand again. One afternoon, he came to visit and said, "Mom, I want to come back to the company. I want to build something honest this time." I saw in his eyes the same light Trevor once had when he first opened the boutique, the hunger to create, not to possess. I smiled and told him, "Then build it with integrity. That's the only thing that lasts." Now he runs the business. I guide him quietly from the sidelines, but he makes his own decisions. Sometimes when I walk past the new sign that bears our family name, I feel both pride and peace. The story that nearly destroyed us has become our greatest lesson. That evening, as the sun set over the garden, I sat on the porch with my journal, the same one I had kept since the beginning. The pages smelled faintly of old ink and rose petals. I wrote slowly, letting each word rest where it belonged. Justice doesn't need to shout. It arrives quietly at the moment when people finally see the truth and bow to it. A few quiet months passed after everything settled. The garden had bloomed again, softer, fuller, as if the earth itself understood that healing takes time. I spent my mornings by the window, a cup of tea steaming beside me, writing letters I never planned to send, letters to my son, to the past, sometimes even to myself. One afternoon, as rain tapped gently against the glass, I began a new one. Dear Shane, I wrote slowly, the pen gliding across the paper with steady calm. Forgiveness isn't something we give because they deserve it. It's something we grant because we deserve peace. I paused for a moment, feeling the weight of every word. It had taken me a lifetime to learn that letting go wasn't weakness. It was choosing freedom over bitterness. Just then, the door opened, and Trevor stepped in holding a small bouquet of white tulips. For you, he said, setting them on the table. They reminded me of honesty. I smiled a quiet, knowing smile. White tulips had always been my favorite, not for their beauty, but for what they symbolized: truth, purity, and the courage to begin again. Later that week, Shane moved into a small house down the street. He came by, often helping me with my charity work, collecting donations, organizing clothes, visiting the local senior center. Watching him laugh with the volunteers, I saw traces of the boy he once was. Open-hearted, gentle, finally at peace with himself. Sometimes he'd stay for dinner, and we'd talk about everything and nothing life hope, and the strange way that pain can make people wiser if they let it. As the sun set one evening, I sat on the porch surrounded by the soft rustle of the garden. The air smelled of tulips and rain-soaked soil. I closed my eyes and spoke softly, as if to the wind. Old age isn't weakness, it's the clarity earned from every betrayal. The words felt true, etched into me by every scar, every tear, every choice to rise again. And if anyone were listening, any woman sitting alone wondering if her pain mattered, I would tell her this. If you've ever been betrayed by your own family, share your story. Share how you survived. Because out there, too many women our age are still silenced, dismissed, and disrespected. And our voices deserve to be heard.